I was born in a small yard where there were a number of families. Most of my plans did not pan out the way I wanted them. I wanted to go somewhere I couldn't, then they wanted me, I didn't want to, and it was always like that. There was one summer when we didn't go, when Belgrade was bombed. And we were all worried, of course, about everyone, And also my brother was killed in the war. He was officer, and he was killed. So everybody lost someone. Wars are bad things. I have listed 4 lessons learned that I wanted quickly to share, maybe with some examples.
Welcome to the Immigrant Computer Scientists podcast, where we talk to computer scientists who immigrated from their home countries for study or for work or for other reasons. In these oral history interviews, you will find established and renowned computer scientists from across academia and industry narrating their experiences of immigrating from where they grew up to a completely different land, often the US. My name is Indy Gupta, and I'm your host. I'm delighted to welcome Dejan Milojicic to the Immigrant Computer Scientists podcast. Dejan is a distinguished technologist at Hewlett Packard Labs, where he has been since 1998 to the present day. He's also known for his service work, especially in IEEE. He's been an IEEE Division 8 Director in 2017 to 2018, and Dejan was also president of the IEEE Computer Society in 2014. Dejan is an IEEE Fellow and an ACM Distinguished Engineer. He's very well known for his work in areas including cloud computing, systems, and middleware research. As I mentioned earlier, Dejan is known for his service work, and he has won many awards for this and for his research, among them being the 2021 Richard E. Mervyn Award and Bronze Medal for Distinguished Service. And here's where in the bio I go in reverse chronological order. Before joining Hewlett Packard Labs in 1998, Dejan Milojicic was a principal engineer at the Open Group Research Institute in Cambridge, Massachusetts from 94 to 98. And before that, he received his PhD from the University of Kaiserslautern in Germany, where he resided from 1991 to 1994. And then before that, he was in the country that used to be known as Yugoslavia, where he was staff engineer and project leader at the Institute Mihailo Pupin from 83 to 91. And somewhat overlapping with that timeline, he also received his BSc and MSc in electrical engineering from the University of Belgrade, Yugoslavia. The BSc was from 78 to 83, and the MSc was from 83 to 86. Dejan, welcome to the Immigrant Computer Scientist podcast, and thank you for being willing to share your immigration story with us.
Thanks, Indy. Great to be here.
So you grew up in Yugoslavia in the 1960s and 1970s. Tell us a little bit about your childhood. What was it like growing up, and what memories do you have of those early days?
I was born in a small yard where there were a number of families. I think there were about 5-6 families all living in one yard. I was the youngest kid. Unfortunately, my mom died when I had 5 months. So all these women in the yard were taking care of me. So sometimes when I'm hearing and listening here today about diversity, inclusion, these things just came naturally to me because I was, raised by all these women. And if I would ever do something wrong, they would correct me on the spot. In that yard, I think I have about 5 or 6 aunts who felt responsibility for me. So they taught me all kinds of things as I was growing up. So I remember, for example, they improvised a small board in the yard, and we used chalks, and they taught me math. So I was exposed to especially math as I was growing up. That was initial lesson, but the true expertise I received by going with my grandmother to the farmer's market, where I was always in the background making sure that she's not cheated by, the salesman. So that's how I think I got my first math exposure.
So this yard that you grew up in, was this kind of a communal living, like a kibbutz commune type thing? Was this a common thing in Yugoslavia in those days, or was it special?
I think it was more by necessity. My grandparents immigrated from a Serbian inhabited area from Croatia. There are three areas there. Nikola Tesla is from one of these areas. We're from the neighboring area. So they all moved, and a number of families, a number of sisters and brothers moved. So they all established their living in Belgrade. And they came into that yard, which originally was one family house, but by necessity they split into all these rooms and built their own homes. Um, the interesting thing is it was in the center of the town, so you would never expect all these small homes in the middle of the town.
And this was in Belgrade itself?
That was in Belgrade. There was a big place called Slavia, and that's where I grew up.
And your schooling itself, you mentioned that you had a lot of math lessons in the yard itself. Did you go to a separate school as well?
No, just elementary school. But there's interesting twist. The benefit of living in the center of the town was that I literally walked to elementary school, I walked to the high school, and I walked to university. So it took me, I think, about 5-6 minutes walking distance to elementary school, 7-8 to high school, and then about 13 minutes to university. So that these were nice days. I mean, you can't imagine today doing that.
So you went to elementary school, and then the rest of your schooling was essentially in the yard by the women around you. Is that a correct characterization?
Yeah.
And so that's a very interesting background. Was this common for kids back then, or was this like just unique to your
No, I
experience?
think it was unique because my aunts were staggered. So the youngest of aunts, she was 8 years younger than me. She was playing role of a teacher. There was another little girl, and so we were. But I was exposed to it, so I got the self-confidence experience. So that was a boost. One would think that it's nothing, but I think it meant a lot to me growing up.
And it was a very small classroom, I suppose, just you and
It
maybe.
was outside.
But the number of students were very small too.
Yeah, the two of us.
So what point did you start to like science and math?
I'm not sure that I would say when I started liking math. It's when I stopped liking it because I felt like I liked math all along. I just felt good with math. I was always a couple of steps ahead of the rest of the students because I was always thinking, when they calculated the quadrant, I was thinking how you can calculate other surfaces, and I was always trying to do. But as I advanced, just pure, I think, curiosity was not enough to advance. There are many better students than me who. So at some point I realized math is great, but math is dry. One needs to apply math, and that's when I started having interest in other sciences.
In your school education, did you use any textbooks or was it just spoken?
Yeah, there were a lot of textbooks. I remember when I would go to summer vacations, I found textbooks from my relatives for the advanced years after so, because I was alone there, I studied, I read them. I wasn't studying, I was just reading them. So again, I felt like I was exposed by pure coincidence in advance of what normally you would study. So I would come back to school, I already knew most of the stuff.
And what language were these textbooks in?
It was all in Serbian.
All in Serbian.
Both in Serbia and Croatia, they were, the same language, basically.
Was it common to have English textbooks back then at all?
Only when I went to university. When I went to university, one professor didn't publish his book. Other professors did, he didn't. I will almost say that I like that professor most, but he didn't publish book. So I bought some English books and I learned from them.
And your dad or your other relatives in the compound, were any of them engineers, or were any of them involved in science and math fields?
No, no, I didn't live with my father. Because my mom died, I lived with my grandmother and grandfather, and nobody else was scientists. My aunt, she became dentist at about the time as I was growing up, and my father and my mother, they were both historians. They were professors at high schools, and they both taught history and philosophy, Latin, and these kinds of things.
How much effect do you think the yard upbringing and your very unique upbringing has had on your current career? I mean, this is a bit of a perspective question, which I usually ask later, but I want to ask this now while we're talking about this.
I think it had a lot, but it was nothing planned, and it was not that much either. It was, occasionally doing math in the yard, and that was it. But it boosted me self-confidence so that I would know just enough to get to the next level always. Obviously, it can't drive you throughout your career. At some point, it dissipates, but you need to rely on new techniques.
Did it make you more of a self-taught person and teach you the value of self-learning?
Without a question, I think it was more from the perspective of curiosity. I think that aspect is much more important. Being curious to figure out something that nobody asked you, or to find another solution, or to have your own ways. That was more important, I think.
So you're growing up in kind of this slightly isolated way from a lot of other kids who are going to school. At what point of time did you start considering going to university as a first step towards an engineering career?
I always thought, because I was a good student in elementary school and in high school, I always knew I would go to some university. I didn't have any doubt. The only question was what. I was expected to go and study math by everyone, including my professor in high school, who really liked me, because in elementary school, I didn't do any competitions, but in high school, I started doing that. And gradually, in the first year, I won award at the town competition. Then in the second year, I won at the Republic, one of the republics. And in the third year, I went to the national competition. I didn't win anything, but it was already, kind of recognition. So they thought that I was good in math. But I realized already there that there were substantially better, students. Not only from you can't compare the skills, but you can compare the knowledge. Those who dedicated already at the high school substantially more. And there were special math high schools. I went to the general high school. And I was always drawn to challenges. I was told that electrotechnics is much harder than math. And so I, in the last moment, decided to apply there. And I could choose at that point, because I got some, I had all top grades, so I could go anywhere. The chances were very high that I'll be accepted anywhere. So I just went to electrotechnics. So that's where I am.
So I get your timeline right. So the elementary school, you went to an elementary school, and then you had education and schooling in the yard. And then at some point of time, you went to high school.
No, this kind of education in the yard was when I was a little kid.
Okay.
I started very early, 2-3 years up to 4 or 5. That's when I did that.
So this was before elementary school.
This was before elementary.
And so in Yugoslavia back in those days, my understanding is that there were two kinds of schools: these trade schools and then gymnasiums. Was that the case back then?
Gymnasium, yeah. I went to gymnasium.
Went to a gymnasium. So there was an assumption there that you would go on and study further in the gymnasium.
You could do from either. In certain countries, like I think in Germany, they expect you to go and work after that other type of, as you call them, trade schools. You were not precluded from. So there was, for example, electrotechnical high school, not high school, secondary school, and a lot of my friends attended that school and then joined me back at university. So it wasn't exclusive.
Next, moving on to your college year. So it's around 1978 when you started your BSc. So as you're considering university, did you have a choice of major? Do you actually choose electrical engineering, or was it through some exam system? How was the admission process?
No, at the beginning you choose which university you go to. So that's all Belgrade University. So I chose faculty of electronic and electrical engineering. And the first year was common for everybody. At that time, there was electronics, there was power and energy, and there was automation and a few others centers. But the first year was common for everyone. And then in the second year, I was expected to choose where to go, and I chose electronics. I still don't know why, but that's what I chose. It appealed to me somehow. It was more interesting than everything else.
And were there constraints on the choice in the sense of, you could choose something only if it's if you have a good enough GPA? I mean, was it competitive to choose particular majors over others?
I don't think there were any issues at that time. They wanted to balance, so they opened up to anyone, as far as I remember. You couldn't get the first year because, they wouldn't accept everyone. But once you're in, they allow us to choose which direction to take.
Focusing on your just BSc years, 1978 to 83, how much emphasis would you say was there on the electrical and electronics engineering side versus the software side in those years of education?
There wasn't any software. I'm not sure that I've done any software until I started working, which was in 83. Even the first program that I wrote, it was nothing. It was Fortran for some computers. I almost didn't do any software. It was all electronics and, electromagnetism and engineering. It was all engineering. I got interest in programming only in the Master of Science, and then while working in parallel.
So you're reaching the end of your BSc. Are you already starting to do research while you're a bachelor student, or?
No research. No research during bachelor.
And what made you choose the MSc? Was it just the logical next step, or was it something that?
Well, I always wanted to continue. I continued studying, so I finished in 83. There were all kinds of interesting things there that I may share if you care about. But since you asked me, I wanted to go after the Bachelor of Science to United States to study there, to continue. But I couldn't secure anything. I went through some friends, this or that. It didn't work. And so instead I went to work where I did the practical project. So you're supposed to do 4.5 years of Bachelor of Science, and the 9th semester, or the 10th semester really, or the one half of the last year, you're expected to do the practical project. So at that point I went to Institute Mihailo Pupin, and there I've done, which was really interesting, some logic for the hybrid computer. So they were building a computer, a hybrid computer, analog digital, and I was asked to verify some logic for controlling the analog part. And if you will, that was actually the first time I was exposed to research. So I wasn't right. That part was really research. But these 4.5 years, there was no research. It was just studying, which was in a way good, because almost after that, I didn't do any studying. I was doing only research, including for Master of Science and PhD. I'll explain that later. But at that point, they were very pragmatic. So the person who was my advisor for Bachelor of Science, he asked me to fix this. I fixed it. In addition, I designed better choice, and he told me, well, okay, so now go and keep on fixing things. I said, well, I don't want to keep on fixing things. It may be of interest to you. For me, it's more interesting to do research and do the thesis. He didn't like that. But I wrote the Bachelor of Science thesis, which was really good. They really appreciated it. They thought that was one of the best, even though they didn't like that I didn't work for them. But that's a trade-off. And then because I wanted to go to US, I told those in institute that I don't want to stay there, because they wanted to hire me. And I said, look, I want to go to United States. And I said, okay, nice, goodbye. And once I didn't secure going to United States, I came back. That project didn't have openings, but I got hired by someone else who knew that I was good, so they hired me. So for about a year, I didn't do anything because there wasn't any project. They just hired me as a backup. But then they started a very, very interesting project of building their own multibus one base computer for the banks and post offices. So they develop everything from scratch, hardware, they even computers, they even build the monitors, and then software, the system software for this hardware and
The
the
whole stack.
application,
Yeah.
the whole stack. And I was responsible for system software. I was one of the three people. I worked with two colleagues who were really great guys, and I learned a lot from them. And the interesting thing is that at that time, because I again liked doing research, so I did the same work as a practical thesis for Master of Science. So I did literature survey and all of that. I noticed that the competition at most had 2 users per their computers, and we managed to put 16 users on a single board. So that was one 8086, and then 16 users in addition. And it was quite interesting because it was advanced development, but it was also the product that eventually went to all banks, post offices. So that was a great satisfaction going to banks and post offices and sneaking behind these places where they work to see whether they have our own monitors and computers.
The real users and real systems that they use. You got exposed to that pretty early in your career.
Very early, so no jokes. You have to deliver, and and we went to the trade shows, exposed those. It was the full experience. From conceiving it from nothing to conceiving it to developing, testing, etc. And then we went on to 386. For 386, we expected to port Unix, so we bought actually Unix System 5. At that time, it was, I think we got 3.2 and then 4.0 from AT&T. We got the full software, but we never used that one. We just used we bought the binaries and just developed device drivers. So again, I was doing device drivers for all kinds of equipment, starting from the bootstrap. I worked with a colleague of mine who lives here now in the United States. That's how we started. He did the first things, but then I've done all kinds of device drivers for the serial lines, then for disks, for network, tapes, etc.
Tell us a bit about the Institute Mikhailo Pupin. Was it allied with the university or was it a standalone entity? Did it have funding from the government? What was its charter?
It was both. It was extremely entrepreneurial. So that project that I was telling you was driven by the director of our lab. Out of, I think at that time there were like 11 labs. It was pretty big. It was over 1,000 people. It was, I think, almost as big as HP Labs when I came here. And it had all kinds of things. They were aligned with universities but independent. And they've done for all kinds of governments around the world because Yugoslavia was non-aligned. They were able to work for Western and Eastern countries and they leveraged it quite well.
This is the Immigrant Computer Scientists podcast interview with Dejan Milojicic, distinguished technologist at HP Labs and immigrant from Yugoslavia. You mentioned earlier that towards the end of your BSc, you applied to US universities. Was there a particular reason you wanted to come to the US?
It's a longer story. So my great uncle, he left Yugoslavia, Belgrade, Serbia, however you want it, when I was 5 years old. And he would occasionally come back, and I always wanted to go and visit him. I remember I was 15 years old when I declared to my grandparents that I'm going to visit him, and they were so concerned because they knew I was stubborn and I would just do it no matter what. So they convinced me somehow. There was a council of my aunts got together to explain to me, hey Dan, you're still a kid, you don't travel to United States like that. So I eventually went after high school. I went there. He wanted to keep me there to study at university there. I didn't want at that time, because I saw he was living in a little village. It was nearby Dallas. There was McKinney, which is little town. Mm-hmm. Then there was another town, Altoga, and then he lived by that one. So it was.
So you visited here when you were a teenager, briefly.
18 years old, yeah. But I didn't want to stay. I said, no way, I'm going back, center of Belgrade, France, all that. And I thought it was a good choice at that time. But then when I finished university, I wanted to go, but I couldn't. I didn't even apply. I was trying to go through personal connections. That's how it works. You probably know in India, there's a lot of things that are done through personal connections, but none of them panned out. So if I have known, as I knew later, I would have applied regularly and it would have happened. But I didn't know how to do it, and so it didn't happen. So I stayed and I worked, and actually it was a good choice because I learned tons of things at that institute. I still, to this day, I am proud of all the things I've done there.
Looking back on your BSc, MSc, and also your school years, you mentioned your aunt, and you mentioned, I think, one professor who you worked with in undergrad. Were there other mentors or role models who you think influenced your your career path in the longer run?
I think I was trying to get the best of anyone. I never had a single role model. That professor I liked a lot. There's interesting story with him I'd like to share. He was really tough. He was the toughest. It's not like in the United States where everybody passes, or most everybody passes all the time. It's just difference in grade. He prevented a lot of students to finish university, not on purpose, but he maintained some standard, and if you don't meet that standard, he doesn't let you pass. So he was really, everybody was afraid. One of my best friends stopped university because of him. He could never pass his exam. So I took that exam, not on the first occasion when I was given opportunity, but on the second. And I did, it was success to even pass, to get the lowest grade. It was really, and I did, but he said, okay, here's the grade, go away. And I said, I don't want it, the way he told me. And so I rejected it, and people were shocked that I've done that. So I come for the next exam, and I get the same grade. It was all written, both. He wasn't there, and I felt stupid. Okay, I canceled the first time, so I canceled the second time. So I get third time in front of him, and in the meanwhile, because he was horrible presenter, teacher. He was very smart, but he couldn't explain anything. Everyone has his strengths and weaknesses. So I clarified everything, with him. I went, met him personally, asked him everything. I felt I knew everything, but the trick with him is he always comes up with new questions because he wants you to think, not to just learn, he wants you to come, even in the exam, with completely new solutions. So he asked me one question, and I said, I don't know. He asked me second question, I said, I don't know. And he said, okay, go sit back in the room and wait. And it was all good. I don't mind waiting, but I was supposed to fly that night to the seaside to meet my nowadays wife. And he didn't ask me. So, 1 hour passes, second hour passes. So I keep on asking, hey, can you, I'm still here. Can you ask me, say, are you rushing for the train? I said, no, for the plane. And so eventually he asked me and asked me 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 questions. I knew everything. And he gave me the middle grade, which was still great. I got 8 out of 10. The 6 is passing. So
that's some tough love from a teacher.
yeah, and it's good. I appreciate that.
In the 1980s, the political situation in Yugoslavia, was it already starting to deteriorate? Did it have any effect on your life as a student or your life in general?
No, as a student, not. Even during the work, not. It started in 90s, a little bit before that. I mean, you can notice things. I was serving army, military. It was mandatory. So I was
And it was a
serving.
1 year military service?
Yeah, it was 1 year, but I optimized it, you can tweak things, you can donate blood, you can reduce. I also invented my own business trips I visited a bunch of institutes, even though it wasn't recommended, but I managed. So I shortened it. But you can recognize, under the cover that things are brewing. So that was in 86, 87.
Yeah.
And then in 1990s it started. And I went twice to United States at about that time. Once I went for the project for that Unix porting that I was mentioning. And the other time I got some award for a few months from, Republic of Serbia or whoever. So when I returned, it was 1990. And I remember I noticed a sign in Institute for the some ability to go to apply for Germany for grants. And I didn't really want to go at all because I just came back from United States. It didn't make any sense. But I inquired, and the lady who was working, she said, yeah, it's interesting, but you stand no chances of applying. You don't have time to do that. And, it's like when you show the red flag to the bull, I said, who doesn't have any chances? So I applied, and it was really tough, but I got it. And why I'm telling you all of this? So I applied in 1990. And in 1991, when I won it, literally within the days of they coming to pick me up to go into the war, I left. So I wish I was smart to predict it. I wasn't. It was pure luck.
Your military service, tell us a bit more about it. Was this just like the military service we see on TV, you're running around the yard, or was there other components?
Very, very tough, very tough. It's drills that you do, picking up cigarette butts on the yard, making sure everything is clear. You have, I think, 2 minutes to get out of the bed in the middle of the night, put equipment and be outside with a gun. But that lasted for, I think, 1 or 2 months. And then the officers realized, because at that time I already had Master of Science, and it was rare that anyone has. A lot of people started them usually as a way to delay military, but I got it. So I finished my Master of Science before military, and I couldn't postpone it after that. I was hoping I don't go, I until I went through the gate, I thought something will happen, but it didn't, so I had to serve it. But I got best out of it because I've done a lot of things. I did some programming there. I visited another institute in Croatia, went back to Belgrade. I even organized myself. I went to study French in the town.
So it sounds like your MSc background and in general your entrepreneurial nature allowed you to reduce the number of months of military service. But it sounds like it was a one-off thing. It was not like written in the system that people with technical background could have exceptions like that. No. Just everyone figures out their own, and it just works in the system.
It worked for me. You work around. Yeah.
When you were applying for this program in Germany at Kaiserslautern. This is 91. Did you consider the US at all at that point?
No, no. It's interesting. You'll hear later, most of my plans did not pan out the way I wanted them. I wanted to go somewhere I couldn't, then they wanted me, I didn't want to, and it was always like that. But I already applied for the PhD in Belgrade. You don't need to do anything. You just apply with some proposal, and then you're expected to do the work, publish papers, and all of that. And it was approved. But I realized while I could do Masters of Science while working, and even that was a stretch, but I was pretty energetic. So during Master of Science, for example, I used to moonlight in some other company from 4 to 8, then work from 8 to 4, my regular job, and then 4 p.m. to 8 p.m. I did my Masters. So I could do all of that for Masters, but for PhD, it wasn't trivial. For PhD, you have to really spend quality time. So I thought, well, maybe if I go to Germany, spend a year there, I can focus only on research, and then I come back and publish, and but I started that way. I was expected to spend 2 months studying language, which I really enjoy. It was like vacation for me because I already knew language. I studied languages already in elementary school, so I finished both English courses outside in evening classes and German and French. So I didn't really need these 2 months, but I had great time with other students. And then 10 months I really focused on doing research. There, I literally have done it 5 a.m. till 5 p.m. I like these structured ways. So 5 a.m. I was in my office and stayed there until 5 p.m. 5 days a week. And then on Saturdays, I would probably do half a day, and Sunday I would occasionally work because I already had 2 daughters, and I was married, and they both came with me at that time to Germany. But the issue was that because of the war, and professor liked me because he saw I was there every time he comes in the office, I'm there, and I was ambitious. I already had a lot of work done, but don't forget, I was already working in an institute for 8 years. So I was extremely experienced, and I picked up practical thesis that was Mach microkernel and how to do load distribution on top of it. So I ran it like a project. I had a few students over there who worked with me. I worked with them. So I was able to accomplish a lot. So professor recognized after a year, or even a little bit, few months before that he can benefit from me, his whole group, and that I was doing a good job. So he offered to me to do PhD there instead of Belgrade. So after a year or a little bit before that, I formally applied for extension of this grant. That was with DAAD, which stands for Deutsche Austausch Akademische Dienst, or Deutsche Akademische Austauschdienst, means German academic exchange service. So they extended for 1 more year, and that wasn't enough, so we extended for 3 more months. So effectively, I was working for 2 years because I lost 2 months in the beginning. So in 2 years, I was able to finish this work that I planned, to write the thesis, and to graduate.
The moonlighting that you described, the work, was that out of necessity or was that just out of interest?
Both. I was about to go to serve the army. It was good to have some money. But I was also intrigued. They came with a hard problem, and I'll tell you what the problem is. It was a really interesting problem, practical one. So that was another company we worked with who were working directly with banks, and they purchased a banknote machine, and it worked well. They connected it to the system, but occasionally it would count. It would drop 1 count of the banknotes. And you can't do that. You can't miss a single penny with those things. And they realized that because it was Unix machine, it wasn't real time. On certain occasions, the interrupts were blocked, so the protocol wouldn't acknowledge in communication with that machine. It was serial communication board. So they asked me to find a way how to fix it, recommending that I write a device driver for the intelligent board that was there. And I looked at it, and I knew how to do that. I've done all kinds of device drivers, and I got quite a bit of money for that too. But then I thought, well, I want to do it better. So I looked. There was a firmware on the board. So rather than writing the whole device driver, which takes about 3 months to write, or up to 3 months to write, up to 3 months to make it reliable and robust, I changed the firmware just to reply NAC, ACK whenever request comes. So it was a small program. It still took time to debug, test, prove that it works, but I really enjoyed it, and I have to pass it to someone else to maintain it. So they earn some money. I got a lot of money, and I solved the problem for the company. They earn dramatically more money from ability to sell these banknotes machines.
You are listening to the Immigrant Computer Scientists podcast interview with Dejan Milojicic, distinguished technologist at HP Labs and immigrant from Yugoslavia. Returning to the point where you moved to Germany to do your PhD, and this is 1991, and you were there till 1994.
Really end of 1993.
93. There was a language change. There was, of course, a culture change. I want to ask about, what the cultural differences were and what was the hardest thing for you when you moved to Germany. And I also want to ask about, how it was managing your family with, you mentioned 2 kids.
Well, let's start with the more important, managing family with 2 kids. It was not easy, but if you ask my wife, she probably would say that was the best time of her life. Because Germany as a country, it's very nice to kids. They have all kinds of opportunities there, and they went to the preschool, the older daughter, the younger one had a lot of opportunities. There are a lot of parks, a lot of amusement parks, and Europe in general, they take care of kids substantially. So, but at the same time, it was a small apartment, 1 bedroom and a kitchen. We even had my mother-in-law come. She slept in the kitchen to help my wife, because my younger daughter came. She was, I think, 8 months old. And even more interesting was that they came literally with the last flight out of Belgrade. Mm. After that, the airport was closed, so no one could fly after that. And the war started fully. We did come by buses periodically, once or twice, for the summers when things would, calm down. But it was not easy, and for me, obviously, it was tough, But I would go and work, and once you work, you focus on that. And I also had an uncle there who lived not far away. He helped me really a lot, just presence of his. He helped me buy the car, I gave him money, but he bought the car. That's where all this moonlighting helped, because I brought a little bit of money. I wasn't rich, but I was able to buy the car, which helped me a lot driving back and forth. It also enabled me to go to Grenoble. That's another twist. In Grenoble, you said that I work in Open Group Research Institute. It was really initially Open Software Foundation Research Institute, and they changed the name. And they had 2 institutes, one in Cambridge, the other in Grenoble. So I went 6 times to Grenoble Research Institute. Can you imagine, during 3 years, because I went even the year before, I went there 6 times. So I wasn't expected I'll go and work there. But I didn't once I graduated, because I've done literally what they were doing. And I've accomplished certain things that weren't accomplished elsewhere. And because I was working practical, I found a lot of bugs during the work. So I ended up really going to Cambridge, Massachusetts, because they wanted someone with experience. But let me answer your question about the culture. Compared to United States, almost any country in Europe is not that, I wouldn't say nice, but they treat immigrants differently. You are forever Gastarbeiter, meaning visiting worker. Um, it's that way. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm not saying it's good, but it's that way. So you are never German while there. I mean, even people who came from Russia, who were originally Germans, who emigrated a long time ago, came back, they weren't treated as Germans. They weren't Germans. Um, but you get used to it. On a positive side, they treated professors as gods. So if I were to stay as a professor there, I would have been God too, in a way. That's the way how things were. I'm not sure if things changed. And these were my impressions. I spoke German, although the first year I think professor had it wasn't hidden agenda, it was open agenda. He told me he noticed that I spoke English very well, so he wanted his whole group to speak English. So the first year we spoke English. But second year, once we agreed that I do PhD there, he forced me to speak German. So first year I spoke English, second year German, and then it was done almost. So then
And you already knew German when you moved to Germany?
I did. I finished German all courses long time ago. When I was I started them while I was in high school, and then I finished them while I was working. After that, I finished them in French. And then I was again in this 2 months German studies. But I didn't use it that much, really. We spoke German, but I wrote my thesis in English. If I had to write it in German, it might have taken it twice as long, 4 years instead of 2 years. So.
And when you visited the Open Software Foundation in Grenoble, was the work there in English, French?
Oh, English, all English.
So now you're reaching the end of your PhD, did you consider going back to Yugoslavia, or was the country just shut off at that point?
Not only that the country was shut off, but I realized that I can't do research that I wanted to do there. That was my primary motive. I wanted to do research. And I wanted to do it at the highest level. Grenoble would have offered that to me, Cambridge too, so I went to Cambridge. I chose Cambridge. I got offers to stay in a couple of places in Germany. I interviewed there at a couple of institutes, and I got offer from one university to stay there to continue studies. They have another grade after PhD, which is like paid grade, which is like extremely competitive. But I felt that Europe as a whole for the operating systems, which was my area, wasn't on par to United States. And I consider Grenoble as extension of United States. So I spoke to my wife and we agreed to move to United States. Plus, because I already was there, I won't count the first time when I visited my uncle when I was 18 years, but I went twice thereafter. So I was here in Silicon Valley. I understood how things work. I was in love with the research being done here and all the advances. I even visited at that time, I think it was 1990. I visited HP Labs, saw their computers, all kinds of things they've done. I thought that was the greatest things in the world, so I wanted to work there.
You kind of knew what to expect when you moved to the US. Were you surprised?
Not only that I knew, but I liked a lot.
Were you surprised, though, when you moved to Cambridge, Massachusetts? Were there things in the culture that surprised you after you moved? Or that were tough?
Not much. Nuances. Only nuances, because it's Northeast now. It's Boston area. And I chose house, which is very Puritan. There were only, I didn't realize immediately, but after a year or two traveling by train, I realized there was only other non-white person on the train. And only once I moved to Palo Alto, and for a few months I was still commuting because we had a house. My wife was there. I realized there are more non-white people traveling on the subway in other areas of the town, but only early in the morning. It's largely white town, Boston. It was when I was there.
Hmm. And during this time, both the time in Germany and then also when you moved to the US, did you keep in touch with your relatives who were back in Yugoslavia? I'm asking about the 1990s because it was kind of hard, and that was when the war was reaching its crescendo.
Yeah,
Was it hard to keep in touch, and were you worried about your relatives?
absolutely. There was one year, one summer when we didn't go, and Belgrade was bombed, and we were all worried, of course, about everyone, you know. And
That was
also,
'99, right?
my
Yeah.
brother was killed in the war.
Oh,
He was officer, and he was killed. So it's, I mean, everybody lost someone. Wars are bad things.
that must have been very tough for you to handle. So you're in the East Coast, and then you spend 4 years there in the Open Group Research
Yeah,
Institute.
almost 5 years, four and a half.
5 years, so 94 is and 94 is when you moved to the U.S., correct?
On the 2nd of January, I felt like I brought the snow to Boston. I realized later, um, it wasn't me, but there
Yeah.
was a lot of snow there.
And then 98 is when you moved to HP Labs
That's right.
for good for now. What made you make the jump both from the East Coast to the West Coast, but also from one company to another?
Open Group Research Institute at that time, and the whole Open Group, which was really a consortium of the big companies. So it was formed by HP, Digital, IBM, Intel, Hitachi, Convex, and a number of companies. These companies, I think at least, wanted to um, compete with AT&T and Sun, who had their own version of Unix. So they did their own OSF1, which was independent, and they shared the investment because no single company could invest in developing the whole new operating system. So that was motivation how that company came about. And after a number of years, that motivation went away. So they started downsizing the company. Um, I was even offered to stay. I was offered substantial raise to stay and lead some project. Uh, but I just didn't like the idea. I wasn't after money necessarily, never in my life. I did things to earn money, but money was never the primary motivation for me. I didn't like the whole culture that came about with reduction. These are unpleasant things when people are leaving or not leaving, and how to handle downsizing. So I started interviewing, and I got a number of offers. I think I got like 4 or 5 offers.
Mm.
And I remember I introduced a small process. I wrote all criteria that can lead me to making decision. Then I took that huge list and created a smaller table with those that I thought are most important. Then I asked my wife; she had her own criteria, and then I ranked all of those so that I knew all the numbers. And at that point of time, I threw all that away because I knew, what I wanted. I checked with my wife; she was okay, and I chose Hewlett Packard Labs at that time. And it wasn't easy because they were in the middle of the hiring freeze.
Mm. Mm.
And so I had to wait. And that offer wasn't the highest. I got more money at other places, uh, maybe even substantially more. But what I learned at that time is that your hiring manager is the most important person. Um, I liked the other guy who was making me offer, but I just didn't believe in him. So I went with HP Labs. He went out of his way to hire me. It wasn't again only about money. It was just how they treated you. And another thing is, there was another gentleman. His name is John Sventek, who was leading. He was well known in middleware community. You might have remembered him. He was
Absolutely.
one of the. I think he carried the same title as I do, Distinguished Technologist, and he interviewed me. And his first words were, "Dan, I don't think you're a good match for us. I think you're a better match for this other group. But I'd like you to interview with us and hear what we have to say. It may help you long term, no matter where you end up." And I thought to myself, well, if people like this are in labs who don't put themselves first, but really care about everyone, including the employees, I want to work for that place. And up to this point, I'm still in love with the culture. Culture has changed over the time,
Uh-huh.
but the original culture is something that kept me there, and not go to other places which are equally good. I don't have anything against IBM, Microsoft, Oracle, nowadays Amazon, and many other places. But the culture over there was not a good match for me.
Mm. That was a particularly great algorithm you described for making a choice between different options. And a lot of our listeners face these choices when they have multiple offers as well, including students. Make a table, make a list of pros and cons, think about it, consult your wife, consult your family, and then essentially throw the list away
Yeah,
and go with where your heart tells you to go to at that
yeah.
point. So I want to ask a little bit about your service work. You're very much into service in the computer science field, especially a lot of activity involving IEEE, where you have been division director and president. You also coached soccer in Palo Alto for 24
I
years
did
and
it.
running. Uh,
18.
18. What attracted you to service work in general? Did you grow into it, or was it more organic, or was it just an outcome of having grown up in like this communal environment?
It was completely unplanned. Completely unplanned. Everything was unplanned. I wouldn't say that any single move, any single application, whatever, was coincidental. Now, I took these opportunities. It's not like, I didn't play any role in it. I think it all started with my first publication. My first publication was with Usenix, and I still consider Usenix one of the nicest organizations because I think they're pure, really care about members, and there is very little politics. And I really applaud to the volunteer organization there. I was never a volunteer there other than being member out of huge respect for them. But my first IEEE paper I remember was in I don't even remember the name of the conference, but it was something about future directions or future technologies, and it was in Portugal. And I remember I wanted to apply there, and my professor said, but at the same time, you have the paper at Usenix conference in San Diego. How are you going to make it? They are overlapping.
Mm-hmm.
I said, well, let me take care of this. He said, I strongly suggest to you not to apply there. And I still apply, submitted paper to both, because you consult before you submit the papers. I got accepted at both. So he looked at me and said, well, don't ask me now what to do. It's your problem. So I contacted both program committee chairs, and I arranged to have the first session present in San Diego, and then I was able still to make it to the other one. But that was the first paper, and then I got another better conference paper. Then I got invited on some program committees. One paper got into a magazine. They liked it. They invited me to be on the editorial board. Then it led to becoming editor in chief. In the meanwhile, I was program committee chair on multiple conferences. Then someone suggested, would you be interested in getting on on the board of governors of Computer Society? I said, why not? I didn't get the first time invitation, but second time when I did, they invited me. And I was still on the first year of my board of governors out of 3. And someone suggested, would you be interested in being president? And normally at that time, what you do is you go and first be vice president
Right.
of publications, of technical committees and conferences, education, membership, whatever. Then you become the second VP, first VP, and then you apply for president. But I was so energetic, and it's not only that I was energetic, I was really doing a lot of things that were making impact. I introduced, not only that I became editor-in-chief, but I introduced the whole new magazine, which was Computing Now, which was kind of concept of mashups of news, which is the same as, similar to IEEE Edge today. So that was, very successful. I started working on special technical communities, which were kind of a competitor in a way, or supplement to technical committees, which is new members. So I was making impact, and they realized that, person with that kind of energy and innovation in organization of the professional organization stands a good chances of being a president and being good president. And so I said, why not? And I became president the next year. So I think in 2010 I was on the board of governors. 2011 I applied to be president. Or that year, after 1 year, I became president. 2014. And then once my presidency expired, someone asked me whether I'd be interested in being division director. And I didn't know whether I wanted to be that. I checked with my management. They said yes. So I applied. I got elected. And then I was for 2 years director. And then someone suggested that I might want to consider be president of IEEE. I applied and I lost. And now I'm not trying to run again because, I have to take care of my wife and work first.
So the divisions, just to back up for our listeners, divisions, IEEE divisions are these regions of the country that IEEE breaks the country into, or?
Not so. There are two types of, well, there are many directors, about 30 and something. Some are the VPs of different organizations. But in addition to those, there are 10 regional directors and 10 divisional directors. The IEEE as a whole has multiple boards, but the two most important boards are the TAB, Technical Activities Boards, which is comprised of a number of societies and councils. I think there's about 46 of those. And Computer Study was the largest society, so it was entitled to two division directors, Division 5 and Division 8. And then there are a few others like Power and Energy is big, ComSoc is big, Control Society, they're big. They each have one representative. And then all others are consolidated so that they contribute multiple societies to one division director. So that's what division directors are. And then there are regional directors. US, for example, has 6 regions. I'm in region 6. I think you are in region 4, if I remember correctly.
Midwest, yes.
And then there's Canada, there's Southern America, Latin America. And then there's Europe, Africa, Middle East. They all comprise. They're region 8, and then region 10 is East. The whole East, so China, India, Japan, all Eastern countries.
During this service work, it sounds that HP Labs was very encouraging of you investing quite a bit of time into the service work. Would that be a correct statement?
I think that's a correct statement, but the other correct statement is that I don't think that I sacrificed work at all, because I continued working throughout. I mean, you are at these board meetings, you still, if you're a manager, you're still supposed to do, or if you're doing technical work, you're still expected to do that.
Sounds like it was kind of like your moonlighting days where you work.
Kind of, yeah. Well, if you like something, it's not a problem. The problem is if you don't like something, then it becomes a problem.
I want to move to our last segment here, which is retrospective and perspective. And the first question I want to ask is something that a lot of researchers and entrepreneurs face, which is handling failures and handling rejections. Do you have a particular philosophy, or do you have advice for our listeners on how to handle failures and rejections?
Well, I think every success or every failure is there for good reason. So you have to embrace both. If you have had so-called failure, it means that you might have not been ready for that. That, like, the typical case is paper. Okay, your paper doesn't get accepted somewhere. Uh, it's not a failure. I think it's a reward for you because the paper was not good enough. You will work on that paper, you will improve it, you'll do something really good, and that paper will get accepted. So take every so-called failure with a lot of wisdom and try to learn something from that. So that's how I treat them. And the same is true for successes. Don't get carried away, because look at downsides as well. Perhaps you were successful too early, too much, and so.
Many researchers and entrepreneurs also face imposter syndrome, where sometimes they feel that they're not up to the task. Maybe they're like a fish out of water. What advice do you have for our listeners to combat imposter syndrome?
One step at a time. Any problem is huge. Okay, any problem is huge. Divide it in small chunks and address the first one. I mean, it's same true with me. I can show you when I came back from Belgrade, I draw everything I had to do on a piece of paper. And it was frightening, what all I have to do. But if you circle, one or two that are most important and just look at that one, focus on that one, it's not that big problem anymore. It's manageable, it's doable. Do it. Sometimes at work when I'm desperate, okay, I don't make any progress. I go and make order in my office. It's very fulfilling. I've done something. I reach some success and I'm happy about it. So these are ways how I deal with those.
The next two questions are a little bit speculative, but I'm going to ask them anyway. The first is, looking back, if you had essentially stayed in your home country or generally in the Europe region, do you think your career story would have been very different from what it is now?
I think so. I'm not sure that it would be less or more successful. It would be different. Things are different over there. For example, I'm not sure I'd be as much active with IEEE, although I see a lot of IEEE activity here, but the path that I took wouldn't have brought me there because there's a lot of organizational stuff that I don't necessarily appreciate. I like more doing things, making things happen than organizationally. Although I've done these things, so I think it would have been completely different.
Did you ever consider going back to Europe or Yugoslavia?
I did multiple times. As I was telling you, when I wanted something I didn't get, when others wanted, they didn't get. When I was, I think, in Boston area, I wanted to go back and be professor in Germany. I thought that was a good position. It was close to Belgrade. And I interviewed at a few places. I didn't get offers, even though I thought I was a very strong candidate. And those who proposed me thought, I'm not complaining. I'm actually, after that, I was happy I didn't get it. I'm not sure if I would have been happy there as I am here now. So things change, but
I have two more questions for you. The next one is also speculative and hypothetical. You have lived in the US for many years, and your kids have been partly through the US schooling system. You've seen how that works. Hypothetically, if you had grown up in the US rather than in Yugoslavia and Europe, do you think your career may have been different? Your interests may have been different, just based on what you've seen?
I think speculatively, professionally, I might have been much more successful because I think, and my wife may completely disagree with me, but I think here for the top professionals, there's much more opportunity and they nurture them from the very beginning. Whether that would have been exactly correct, I don't know. It's just my gut feeling. Because I always was looking for more opportunities which I didn't have to compete, to do this or that. Here you have much more opportunities. But then on the other hand, people break. if they go too much, too fast, etc. So you never know.
So you feel like the structure and the ecosystem here may have helped you pursue more things than you were able to there.
In my case, I think I would have probably ended up in graduating in some of the top universities here. That's my best guess. Knowing me, at least up to that point. What happens after that, I don't know.
Is there anything else that we didn't cover that you wanted to talk about?
Well, I think I have listed 4 lessons learned.
Yes.
That I wanted quickly to share, maybe with some examples.
Yes.
And I shared those when Joe Sventek, that I mentioned earlier, who was interviewing me, he invited me for commencement speech at Computer Society Department at University of Oregon. So I shared in some form or fashion these. I rehashed them because I lost my notes from that commencement speech. But I think probably the most important one is that going extra mile always pays off. And I'll give you a couple of examples from the past, and then a couple of examples from the near past. When I went to Germany, I didn't know that I would do PhD there. And I was supposed to go to Grenoble, and professor told me, why don't you take this language exam, which you may or may not need it. So it's up to you. And I was deliberating whether to delay travel there. It was really important. So I still stayed and took that test. And without that test, I wouldn't have been able to apply for the second year. So it meant a lot. So that's a little extra mile that I took. Another one was after I'd done my PhD thesis, a professor circulated an email about opportunity to write books. And he suggested, why don't you just take thesis, you modify a little bit, put intro, or forward, do the at the end, change things, etc. So I've done it. I wasn't expected to do that, and I didn't get anything out of it, a little bit of money, which didn't matter. But it ended up being really important for me to get the special status for getting green card, outstanding researcher. Without that, I wouldn't have gotten it. It doesn't mean that all of these will eventually turn into something really big payoff, but most recent ones are a couple of papers that I wrote, like this peer-to-peer survey paper, which eventually didn't even end up being published. It remained only as a report, and we struggled writing it, because I really wanted to do it well. We wrote it for over 2 years. And eventually it became my top cited paper. It has over 1,500 references. And, so these kinds of little things that you do extra, that they really could pay off substantially. The second thing, which, I gave a lot of examples for, is that you have to be flexible. You don't really know, where life will take you. And just embrace what you get and try to get the best out of it. I gave a number of examples, so I don't need to repeat them. I tried to go to US at some point, and I couldn't. Went there, the other, etc., etc., etc. So just embrace them, because life will take you where life takes you, and get the best out of it. Mm-hmm. The third one, I have 2 more only. I'll be very quick. Is that you have to know yourself. I'll give you one example, which I'm not bragging about, but I tend to know what I'm good at and what I'm not good at. Uh-huh. When I went to that competition in math, after the competition, professor took me at the board, said, "How did you do it?" I said, "Well, I think I made it." "What did you think you got? What award?" I said, "Second." "How did you do your?" Because there were 4 or 5 chunks, and I wrote on the board how much I thought I got on each, and I asked him, "Is that right?" He said, "Right." That was exactly what I got. So, you need to know yourself, estimate who you are, what you are. Another example is to do a lot of introspection. There are all kinds of these evaluations, Myers-Briggs. There's the easiest, probably social styles, and they really help you not just because knowing who you are, but how you interact with others. I remember I became a new project manager in labs, and I went to a guy. By the way, my social style is driver, out of 4 styles: driver, amiable, analytic, amiable, and expressive. I went to the cubicle of a guy, energetic, talked to him. He just, closed up, and, a couple of weeks later, he left the company.
Uh-huh.
He was amiable. I was driver. I was aggressive. He didn't leave because of me, but it might have helped a little bit. Or it certainly didn't encourage him to stay. Right. And he was amiable. He expected me to first build rapport with him, to, show him some love, rather than focus on doing the things. And when you know who you are dealing with, you have to be careful how you deal with that person to, build that rapport and, not act like elephant in the porcelain store like I did on that occasion. And then the last thing is that you are not alone. You can rely on other people, your family, your friends, your colleagues, and whenever you are in the state of any despair, depression, whatever, turn out to other people. They'll help you, and equally try to help them because we are social people, and it's really important to know that you can count on these people. I can give you the most recent example. I was in Belgrade. There was a funeral. I really felt bad. I didn't feel bad, but I was sad, and I couldn't shake it off. And before leaving, I called my cousin. I called another cousin, and another cousin, and another cousin. I wasn't planning it at all. But suddenly I felt so strong, because you are never alone. There are other people for you. And that applies both to life, work, and anything.
That's a great series of 4 pieces of advice. Always go an extra mile first. Second, be flexible. Third, know yourself, or at least get to know yourself. And I suppose that changes over time. But
and others. By knowing yourself, you get to know others.
Get to know others as well. And you're never alone.
You're never alone.
That's a great way. Thank you, Dejan. Thank you for being willing to share your story and for being willing to share your advice with me and with our listeners in possibly one of the few words that I know in Serbian, hvala.
You're welcome.
On today's episode of the Immigrant Computer Scientist podcast, you heard the immigration story of Dejan Milojicic, distinguished technologist at HP Labs. This episode marks the last and 4th episode in our series of episodes on Yugoslavian immigrant computer scientists. If you haven't already done so, you can listen to the lead episode of this Yugoslavia segment, that's episode 1, featuring all the 3 narrators. Coming up next is a series of episodes on this podcast that will be on the theme to and fro. This series will feature a lead episode and 3 oral history interviews from immigrant computer scientists who came from a South American country. Can you guess which country? All the music used in episodes of the Immigrant Computer Scientists podcast is royalty-free. All voice recordings were performed with and are reproduced with full consent of narrators and participants. You can find music credits on our website. Join the online discussion about this podcast on all major social media, including Twitter and Facebook, with the handle CSImmigrant and hashtag CSImmigrant. And of course, the episode guide is available at our website, csimmigrant.org. This is the Immigrant Computer Scientists Podcast.